Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees, two of Hollywood's most iconic boogeymen. But what do a dream-eating burn victim and a drowned mutant kid in a hockey mask have in common, other than murdering big stars before they blew up? In the late 80s, they both inspired what are considered some of the worst video games of all time. But how could these massive Hollywood slashers flop so hard that they're cursed to remain on the big screen and off of our home consoles forever? Welcome back to the stash. Today we're talking about these two beauties. Halloween. I fucking love ghosts and ghouls, goblins, zombies, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, but especially these two. Yeah, even that movie, but not like for that movie. Together, these two have a body count higher than, and just like her, even if you've never seen their movies, you know exactly who they are. Their pop culture impact since the late 70s, early 80s is absolutely fucking bonkers. They're a household name. T-shirts, mugs, action figures, you name it. But even with all that fame, there has been one medium that they have never been able to really break into successfully. Video games. Barring the games where they just appear as cameos, we'll talk about them chill. These two have either not had a game or not had a game that wasn't absolutely plagued with legal trouble. Is it a curse? Who knows? But if it is a curse, it definitely started in the 80s with a little company called LJN. Never heard of them? Don't worry, you probably weren't born yet. Me either. But let me tell you a tale. In 1939 in Queens, New York, the best borough, a man named Jack Friedman was born. As most kids do, he developed a love for toys at an early age, but his love went beyond that childhood fun, and he wanted to make toys for other people. So in the 1960s, he began working as a sales associate for Norman J. Lewis and Associates, selling toys up and down the East Coast. But he wanted to set out on his own and do more, so with the financial backing from his now former boss, he started his own toy company, LJN. Title inspired by his former boss's initials backwards. But don't let the lack of creative title making fool you. Jack had an eye for innovation, and by the 1980s he had secured just a few small licensing deals that would see his company's profits balloon. And when your company makes a lot of money, other bigger companies want to gobble you and your company and all your money right up, especially when they see you corner the pop culture market. So in 1985, another fucking three-letter company that you've never heard of called MCA purchased LJN for a lot of money. But you see, this was tactical because MCA also owned Universal Films, and seeing the success of LJN's movie and TV-based toys, they wanted to expand on that with their own IP. Basically, Universal would make a movie, LJN would make the toys and games licensed for that movie, and MCA would rake in that sweet cash. But Jack Friedman, our man who started it all, saw the corporate writing on the wall. And when the company fully expanded to video games, he left in 1987. That is probably not a great thing. Now, without its inspiring and innovative leader, LJN went headfirst into quantity over quality and began publishing games on all fronts, hitting on all the major 80s greats. And you know who else was coincidentally very popular in the 80s? You fucking guessed it. If you follow my channel and you've watched a bunch of my past videos, you may know that I talk a lot about controversy in video games, especially in regards to censorship and violence. Now I really want you to think about this for a second with me here. Just put your mind in this scenario. Imagine, if you will, it's 1988 and you're a corporate suit dickhead who wants to make as much money as possible from capitalizing on making movie-based video games. Your market is now almost entirely kids. What game do you make? Did you guess two movie franchises about brutally murdering teenagers? Then you'd be right. But you see, these guys are money sharks, not boundary pushers. They weren't actually gonna make games based around the movies. They had seen what happened with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on Atari, a game so controversial stores refused to stock it. the violence. How despicable. So, they knew Congress and concerned parents would do what? Freak the fuck out! As per usual. I gotta throw that on a shirt. But they also knew that they could make some generic bullshit and slap their infamous faces on the cover and move just enough units to support their powdered sugar habit. And that's exactly what they did. LJN outsourced Jason over to Atlas, which you might know for Persona, Shin Megami Tensei, or their greatest achievement, Snowboard Kids 2! The real ones understand. And Freddy got sent to a small studio that eventually would get famous for a bear and a spy or something. I don't really know. Now, jokes aside, it's important to remember that these companies were and still are making great games, but MCA wasn't looking for quality. They were looking to make a profit. A lot of it. So they had these companies vomit out whatever they could as fast as they could as part of MCA's aggressive expansion plan. Yes. Quality and aggressive expansion. Two peas in a pod. And what we got is so much worse than any kill from their respective movies.
Welcome to Wonderland, Alice.
Now, to prove my earlier point, we actually have copy from a prototype of A Nightmare on Elm Street, where the devs did want us to play as Freddy, stating, "You are Freddy Krueger. A horde of obnoxious teenagers is trying to get rid of you by finding your scattered bones and burying them. The only way to stop them is to kill them. You can travel along Elm Street through the electrical and plumbing lines, or step into a mirror and step into another room. The kids have weapons to battle you with, and some of them even possess powerful dream alter egos. But if you can strike before they wake, they'll trouble you no more. So sharpen up your finger razors and get ready to slash, 'cause Freddy's here." Damn, that sounds pretty sick, especially by 80s standards. But that's not what we got. That would have been too controversial. What we got was a generic beat-em-up style side-scroller where you and up to 3 friends play as generic teen guy who collects Freddy's bones and fights zombies, bats, and spiders, and minotaurs. All while we try and stay awake, or else we get transported to the dream world, which is basically a harder palette swap version of the normal world with bony versions of the monsters. Now, some of that sounds pretty cool. Who doesn't want to punch zombies and snakes in the face like an 80s Giga Chad? And that other world mechanic beats out Silent Hill by 2 decades. Just kidding. But there was some legitimately cool ideas. Unfortunately, monitoring your awake meter was damn near impossible, so you're always falling asleep, making the game so much harder. You have no health bar to keep track of, and enemies practically instant respawn, making progression extremely tedious, to say the least. Not that you'd want to progress, though, because once you finish the first house, you just keep doing that with other houses, of which you never know which doors are open or not. And Elm Street is fucking long. Punch ghosts, collect bones, stay awake with coffee. That's pretty much the game. And honestly, actually, that sounds pretty sick when I think about it. Is that my new tagline? Punch ghosts, collect bones, stay awake with coffee. But at the time, that really just wasn't the Nintendo crowd's vibe. They were really out here fucking with plumbers and mushrooms. It released to incredibly mixed reviews that declined steeply over time, citing unfair and repetitive gameplay, uninspired story, and overly complex mechanics. But LJN wasn't done. In 1989, Friday the 13th was released. You controlled one of 6 camp counselors who were tasked with running around Camp Crystal Lake trying to light fires in cabins and fight off hordes of angry birds, wolves, zombies, again, and occasionally Jason, with stones and knives, all while the same 5-second loop of music played continuously for your entire playthrough. Some say it's still playing to this very day. Aside from that, it felt bloated with enemies that never existed in any of the movie franchise to begin with, and there was also no plot. And to be fair, there's not always a huge plot in the Friday the 13th movies, if we're being honest. You had to light fires, fight off Jason, and occasionally save some faceless kids. Ooh, that uncanny valley. But good luck doing any of that because the map was made up in a way that proper directions seemed not to exist, meaning navigation was near impossible until memorized. i.e. going left on the screen could be traveling up on the map, etc. Characters had strengths and weaknesses that were never described in-game, button inputs were ridiculously overcomplicated, and if you braved the motion sickness-inducing cabin animation and actually encountered Jason, you were thrown into an incredibly hard Mike Tyson Punch-Out style game with the masked man himself in his iconic purple jumpsuit?
No, the real one. Perfection.
Now you do all that 3 times and the game is won. Sounds fun, right? No, it's awful. And everyone agreed. In fact, this game sits on many top 10 worst video games of all time list. It's been called repetitive neon pastel vomit, craptacular, and I quote, so frustratingly difficult, you want Jason to slaughter all the counselors and then you. Anything so this game will end. End quote. Now, keep in mind, this wasn't in the age of Reddit and YouTube, so people generally kept their criticisms pretty constructive and kind, meaning this was really bad. I'm gonna go on a limb here and say that's not exactly the reaction that MCA were looking for. Or, honestly, maybe it was, and they just didn't give a shit as long as they were making the bag. But they weren't. Atlas and Rare did their best with the time and resources provided. But the games were flopping. They were hemorrhaging money, and so began the curse. These 2 games performed so badly, who was ever gonna touch their IP again? And though sales figures are impossible to find from that time, accounts say that the flop was so extreme, they both became staples of the bargain bin. And with that, we wouldn't see either killer in a game for another 2 decades. No one wanted to take the chance. You see, as I've talked about on this channel before, for a long time, video games were considered a children's medium, until games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap came along, which I talk pretty in depth about on my video about Night Trap here, which you should check out if you've never heard of that game. So the slashers of legend were never gonna flourish outside of movie theaters, in a place where they couldn't actually do the thing they were known for: violence. And I think it's pretty ironic that one of the main games to push the mature rating a few years later, Mortal Kombat, actually ended up being the first time we'd see both icons back on a home system in 3D doing what they do best: punching ninjas. Then that's not to say people haven't tried. In 2017, IllFonic released their widely enjoyed Friday the 13th the game. It's a serious love letter to our iconic hockey masked murderer, but even that was plagued by developmental issues, financial backing shortfalls, and serious legal trouble. So badly, in fact, on December 31st of this year, the game will no longer be available for sale and the servers will go down. So get to it if you've never played it. It's fun and dumb, and you're gonna have a good time. And it's like $5. Our boy Freddy has fared far worse. Despite having an arguably better and more in-depth plot than the Friday the 13th series, he hasn't had a video game since 1990. His only appearances are in Mortal Kombat DLC, as I said before, and of course in the game that has single-handedly kept most slashers alive in video game media, Dead by Daylight. But why? Despite their massive popularity, neither have had a survival horror narrative storyline-based game. In fact, none of the big slashers do, really. They've absolutely clawed their way into some recognition in asymmetrical horror games like Dead by Daylight, and devs like Puppet Combo, which I also have a video on, focus a lot on their type of genre, Puppet Combo having even started his entire career making a Halloween knockoff. But you'd think with the massive success and resurgence of horror games now, somebody would take a chance. Chucky has a successful TV show in its 3rd or 4th season, a new widely praised Scream and Halloween were just released, and Freddy got a reboot. Okay, well we don't have to talk about that one. I think it maybe all comes down to nuance. They were originally shocking for the time because no one had seen anything like them before, and they're less shocking now because we're desensitized to the violence. It's an easy thing to say that violence in modern slashers is cheap because we need more of it. It has to be faster and the jump scares have to be more intense. The audience is dumb, we need more brutality. Generic internet bullshit complaint. But I think the hard truth is that most modern slashers really just aren't written that well. or scored that well. Characters are tropey and generic, jump scares are predictable and unearned, with less emphasis on pace and music, and that translates to games. No one is going to take a chance on these iconic characters because everyone is afraid the stories will suck. And they may be right. Slasher narratives in games could feel really shallow if they only focused on the violence. So creating depth requires adding meaningful choices, objectives, and relationships between characters. But that's hard to build for a boogeyman. So effective slasher game narratives would need to be psychological realism and have purpose beyond just killing or surviving to actually keep players engaged. Personally, I could see a game as like a detective, uncovering a string of murders and then unwittingly getting into the crosshairs of Michael Myers and fighting for survival towards the end. Something like The Condemned, maybe. But how would you all do it? I'd actually love to hear in the comments how you would make sort of a survival horror narrative-based game around some of our favorite slashers like Chucky or, Ghostface. But I wish we could get a team that really understood what made these movies tick, which made them scary, which drew us to them in the very beginning. Because I think if they could translate that into a good video game, it would knock down a door for all the other ones to do the same thing. But until that day comes, we have these beautiful nostalgic stinkers to hold us over. And as the years pass, nostalgia has softened people's view of these titles. They're more loved now than they ever were in their day. And they serve as a capsule for a time in history we'll never experience again. Hell, people even reference their ridiculous designs in limited Funko Pop releases and in-game unlockable skins. Scoring a physical copy nowadays is near impossible without a wallet thicker than Voorhees himself. However, a quick Google search and I'm sure you Goombas can find a way to play these games. Cheers to your VPN. They're not good, but it's Halloween. And maybe if we all play these games simultaneously, we can collectively break the curse that's kept us off our home screens. And if you're looking for something to laugh at and a vintage slasher fix, you could do a lot worse than these two nowadays. Or could you? Hey, if you like what I do here on the channel, make sure you give it a like and subscribe so the algorithm knows to show my videos to other wonderful horror fans such as yourself. And if you're still hungry for more, I've got a lot more dark lore and horror video reviews on my channel. You can check it out on the case files for more deep dives. Thanks for tuning into The Stash. Stay spooky, my friends. And happy Halloween.